Welcome to Mastering Innovation Together with Scott Schafer of Borderline and Chris Koomey of Thorben Consulting. And Scott, a big part of marketing is identifying who your audience is and making sure that you have multiple audiences as you get a more mature business. So how do you identify the initial audience, and then how do you help clients kind of walk through building out multiple audiences?
Yeah, no, 100%. No, I could not agree more. So we have two kind of terms in-house that we use for it. We call it narrowcasting and micro-targeting. So it's meeting with clients, and what we like to do is we like to understand, okay, what is your concept of what your audience is? Tell us, who that audience is. Who's that ideal customer? Who's that key stakeholder? Let's get that information from you. Right. And that typically comes from either a CEO or a C-suite person or a comms person. And then what we like to do is then go through a quantitative and qualitative process to understand if that's accurate. Right. So if the client's historical data marries up to what they're saying their audience is, and how much of that are they currently capturing? And then from a qualitative perspective, interviewing other people inside the organization and outside the organization to get a better understanding of that. And oftentimes in that process, it's revealed to the client that who they think their audience is usually one or two steps removed from who they actually think it is, in terms of who's that transactional buyer, who's that person who has, decision-making capability, who is the person who's willing to champion whatever your, SaaS solution or your tool or your resource is in your organization. And sort of formulating that into both quantitative and qualitative research, we kind of wrap that into the client. And we meet with them and kind of go back and forth on what our data is showing us and see where that marries with what they want, and what we want and what we need, kind of Rolling Stone style, meet in the middle, right? It's the new Ted Lasso trailer. And we figure out, okay, who is your audience really? And then from there, once we've figured out who that audience is, it's then figuring out subsets of that audience who can be positive champions for us in our marketing effort. And that can either be both external or internal. So who are those people from a buyer standpoint, right? Like on the sales side, that we want to get in touch with and, promote what we're doing, who can champion the product internally in the company or in the agency or whoever you're selling to. And then externally, figuring out who are the influencers and the tastemakers on social media or on the internet or in traditional media who can kind of champion what it is that we're doing. And that often can illuminate, if a company has, say, for example, kind of like a SaaS product, let's get some of those people who could help influence others that this is a good and effective product. Let's get them on the product for free or, as a trial basis, so that they can be, an advocate for what it is that we're doing. Because I think, the best way, I hate this term, but it does make some sense, is, getting activated, advocates of your brand, volitionally telling the story of the brand versus us, is oftentimes the most effective way to create like that audience engagement where everyone's sort of drinking from the same trough.
Yeah, what I see is a lot of technology companies, they're almost like they're 5 years behind. They have this product, they have the same presentation to everybody, and recognizing, okay, this person is not an end user, it's not a buyer, but is connected to people or could help me. And I see like my email box is filled up with all sorts of direct response as if I was the end user, and I'm not. So that's
exactly. And that's kind of my point. No, I think it's really adept because I can't remember how many times people have met with where they automatically go into like the C-suite and they go, these are the people who are going to champion the implementation of this SaaS solution inside of an organization. And it's often not top down, it's bottom up. It's finding, the research analyst or the CTO or someone on the technical side who goes, okay, if we implement these three things, we can, expedite and streamline this process by a factor of Y. And then they can actually explain it because they know, the funding decision maker in the organization, the language better. They can actually explain the need as it relates to them corporately. I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things in working with SaaS customers is, and especially ones that have phenomenal products, is trying to figure out a way to get them to understand not everybody's going to inherently understand that your product's phenomenal. And you're almost speaking a foreign language if you're not speaking the language of that company. It's almost like play calling in football. Like if I came out of a West Coast system and you're running, short crosses in John Gruden's offense, it's going to sound really different than it is, in Mike Shanahan's offense. How do you speak it in a language, even though they need it and they know they need it, where everybody can kind of be saying the same thing? So for us, from a marketing standpoint, it's twofold. It's working with them to try to figure out those key talking points, around the why, but then it's also on an audience standpoint, figuring out who can be the best advocates for being able to explain that organizationally. Because the worst thing in sales is to get in that loop.
Where I've come to on sales, I know you know about the idea of having 3 streams of income: current income, 3 streams long-term income, and 3 streams preservation. But I think from a sales perspective, every company needs to have at least 3 audiences. And that allows them to rotate their sales efforts, because sales efforts get stale.
100%.
Right? If you're doing one. And so for the folks that I'm working with, we're getting them to do, week 1 of the month is this audience, week 2 is this audience, week 3 is that audience, and also doing that on a monthly scale as well. And that helps a lot.
And I think the proliferation of media, like you can corporately have 4 different links. I mean, one of the things we also do for audience rotation, and it's stupid simple, but we often don't think this way, is like you can, within the same company, take over 4 different personal LinkedIn accounts of officers of those companies who are salespeople and those kinds of things, and then have different audiences cultivated with each of them, so that, to your point, you can activate those when you need to, and you can A/B test different messaging to see what's resonating with different audiences, and figure out how to make the wave work right.
Yeah, and I've found, like, sometimes it's something that has nothing. LinkedIn is now becoming like the inspirational message place, where people are just posting things so everyone will like it, but
a little bit, yeah.
I mean, because they're afraid of promoting things directly, but a lot of times people want basically they want the non-task oriented post more than the task oriented post, and that makes them more amenable to it.
Yeah, I think we're at a weird time for that, right? Like where brands, it's sort of like what Chris Rock was talking about in his thing over the weekend. Like, it's a tough time for brands when, you're selling yoga pants and you're trying to sell, that these are the most ethical yoga pants ever made, versus like, hey, these are really good yoga pants. So I think for us, we're much more of that mindset of like, and for us, it's trying to figure out, okay, how do, in this climate where it's a totally good thing that we're focused on it, but at the end of the day, ultimately, you got to make sure the SaaS solution that you're buying, it's great that it's ethical, but does it work, and does it solve the challenge for what's happening? I think it's an interesting point about LinkedIn, about comms perspective, is I think companies are feeling sort of like they need to speak to things outside of the framework of what their product is. And I think it can sometimes get them in trouble. And it can also sometimes not be the most effective tool in selling product. So it's an that's one that we're thinking through every day closely, is just sort of kind of old school marketers of, what's your product? How can it help somebody? How do you communicate that? It's an interesting time.
And people don't want to hear that all the time. So you need to come up with some fresh takes on it. So Scott Schafer, thank you so much for mastering innovation together with us today.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for mastering innovation together today with Thorben Consulting. This is Chris Koomey. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy the show, if you have any comments, questions, or just want to learn more about what we do. Thanks for joining us.